Welcome to Mid-Level Adventurers, a podcast where non-experts talk about the things that they love. I'm Jarrod, and with me for this first series is my co-host, Matt Morris.
Hello everyone, it's Matt Morris.
Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop role-playing game that incorporates not only a character's physical attributes, such as strength and durability, but their magical abilities as well. Since the beginning of this podcast, we have mentioned the magic that is intrinsic to Dungeons & Dragons, but we have yet to have a real discussion on what the magic in Dungeons & Dragons actually is. Where does it come from? What forms does it take? Please listen along and join us as we talk about that most wondered of subjects, magic. That brings us to the first question, of course. What is magic?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll give my best interpretation of it as it is in game, and you'll have to correct me. Magic is another untangible explanation for how you can do sort of fantastical things.
I'm going to throw out what I think like a general definition of magic is. So I think that magic is the ability to manipulate forces outside of yourself to achieve a desired result.
I like that answer much better.
And in D&D, there's essentially two kinds of magic, right? So you got your arcane magic and your divine magic.
Right.
Arcane magic is generally attributed to classes that gain their magic from study or practice or birthright.
Sure, yeah.
Such as wizards, bards, sorcerers, warlocks. Divine magic, however, comes from higher beings or higher powers or belief systems. Classes like clerics, druids, paladins, and even rangers get their magic from divine sources.
Oh, that's interesting. I did not know that about the Rangers, actually.
Yes, rangers are divine casters because of their connection to the natural world.
Ah, that makes sense. For some reason, I guess I sort of put them in the same slot as, like, bards.
I can see why you would, but no, because they rely on their wits or their wisdom.
Sure.
And not their force of personality.
That makes sense.
They get their magic from those wits and its connection to nature, and they see how the world works, and that's how they unlock magic at level 2, I believe.
Okay. Well, here's a question for you. Speaking of the breakdown of what class draws their magic and their power from where, I've always understood, right, like sorcerers are born with it, right? They have sort of maybe through a bloodline or some other in their heritage that it gives them the attributes of being able to cast. Wizards study, right, from tomes and other text. Warlocks were always interesting to me because they have a...
Warlocks have patrons.
Yes, a patron.
Which would give you the idea that, they must be divine casters.
Right.
But they are not, because they do not get their powers from a belief system or an ideal or anything like that. They do get it from another powerful entity, but they get it by making a deal with that entity.
And those entities are not necessarily deities.
Correct.
Is that what I'm understanding? Okay.
In fact, more often than not, they are not deities at all.
Ah, haha.
They might be high-powered or maybe even demigods, but they are not deities.
Okay.
They are high-powered creatures such as like very celestial unicorns or maybe a deva or other angelic being in the service of a god. Or they could be some eldritch horror from the before times that's locked away in the astral sea in a prison. But because of some event that happens, they are able to eke their powers and their thoughts to a person, and that person agrees and makes a deal and they get those powers. Or it could just be you literally signed a contract with a devil. Or you could be tricked into one with an archfey.
Ah, so there's it goes both ways, right? They're obviously getting something back in return for lending you this ability.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
But what that is up to debate. Depends on the nature of the patron, and it depends on the nature of the warlock. There are warlock-patron relationships that are very close and very friendly.
Okay.
And there are some that are very distant where they don't talk at all.
I see.
And it's kind of just, we agreed for this for our reasons at the time, and now I don't care. But some patrons might be very involved in their warlock's life.
This is not to say that any one of the avenues in order to gain the ability to cast magic is stronger than the other, right? So getting your power from a deity versus a patron versus some arcane mystery doesn't mean that you're better or worse at magic, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Because each class that has the ability to cast magic does it differently.
I see.
Now, the difference in how they cast and where it comes from and what they can do is both mechanical and flavorful. For example, you take your wizard, they study, they learn spells, they copy spells down, they transcribe spells, they experiment, and that's how they learn spells. Your bards see how the world works, and using their charm, they are able to manipulate the finer points of reality.
Okay.
Sorcerers kind of intrinsically know how to pull at the threads and fabric of reality in order to affect change. And that may or may not be good.
Yeah.
It all depends on the sorcerer type, and there's a lot of fun ways to explore that. Each class does have their own spell list. There is crossover on that list. For example, pretty much everyone in the arcane casting list can all learn Fireball.
Ah, yeah.
Not on the Druid spell list.
No, it's not. You have a slightly different fire-related spell. You've got Produce Flame, which is sort of the, downgraded version, I guess.
Yeah, it's much more of a natural kind of thing,
Yeah.
whereas Fireball is like, I'm taking all this energy and focusing it on one point, and then a big kaboom happens.
Right.
Not really the way Druids tend to go with things.
Fair enough, no.
So there are different avenues to achieve the same spell effects. However, the amount of spells open to various classes differs greatly. Bards and Warlocks don't have very large spell lists, for example. They can't learn too much, and their number of spell slots is very different.
Yes.
Whereas the Sorcerers get a lot more, but the Wizards have the most spell slots available of any official class for D&D 5e.
Okay, it's good to know.
Wizards can pretty much learn any spell.
As long as they've studied it, take the time, I assume.
Yeah, and there is mechanically a time and a gold investment in that.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, because that makes sense. Their ability comes solely from... It's training, isn't it? It's the same way,
Yep.
if you wanted to get better as a sword fighter, you needed to pick up that sword and put in the time with it, and that makes sense. So I understand, I think, the sources, but there are a couple that are a little easier to grasp, I guess, like the deity.
Yeah.
That is fairly straightforward, it sounds like.
Yeah, you believe in a god, you worship a god, you may get power from that god.
Right, and it probably is flavored depending on the deity.
Mm-hmm.
The patron, even though there may be some rules that are different depending on the patron as how that deal transpires, that makes a lot of sense. But I think the biggest mystery to me might be the arcane source, as there's a less direct explanation for it.
Yeah. So this leads us into a fun little kind of flavory thing.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much, where does magic come from and what is the source of it, right?
Exactly.
So this is totally up to whatever world you're playing in. In the Forgotten Realms, which is one of the most popular Dungeons & Dragons settings, and we've talked about it on previous podcasts, magic is the result of the two gods, Selûne and Shar, battling each other out. Selûne and Shar are polar opposite goddesses. Selûne is the goddess of the moon, and Shar is the goddess of darkness and shadows.
Gotcha. Yin and yang, almost.
Yeah, they're like two sides of the same coin, right? They end up, having this battle, and their energies begin to combine because of their wounds. Their energies combine, and it ends up creating a new goddess named Mystra. And Mystra is also created at the same instant as the Weave. And the Weave is the source of magic on Toril in the Forgotten Realms. This weave is likened to a blanket that covers everything, and Mystra is the goddess of it. She is connected to it. She is the one who knows all the secrets. What spellcasting in that world allows mortals to do is manipulate the individual threads, resulting in magical effects. So it's like tugging on this bit of the tapestry and lets you cast prestidigitation.
I see.
And that doesn't have to be true in every single game that's ever played. This is just how the Forgotten Realms has chosen to do it.
Yeah.
Perhaps there is no god of magic, and perhaps the magic is sourced of a giant crystal or some kind of sleeping eldritch entity that has been seeping magic into the world forever.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's just simply always there and nobody's ever really questioned it. And perhaps it comes from some sort of elemental source, like in the Dark Sun campaign setting.
Yes, I like that idea a lot, actually.
Magic can come from anything, or it can just always be there. It's up to however you want to flavor it in your game. And the fun part, I think, is when players choose characters, what their relationship to magic is, what they choose that relationship to be. Whether they studied in a wizard school, or whether they've just been traveling around the world, kind of paying attention to how other people do it. Whatever they choose, whatever their relationship is, I think that is where the fun part comes in.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of played around with that with my druid character in another campaign of ours, sort of playing with the idea that he was getting his source of magic from a connection to the natural world, being a druid, but that it was still very new to him in some ways. So he was sort of trying out new spells as he learned them, not entirely sure what the result may be, and maybe avoiding certain spells that might not have set with him personally. And
yeah, this is kind of the fun thing about divine casters in general. Arcane casters have to learn the spells that they can cast. Druids, clerics, paladins, and rangers too all automatically know all of their spells because they just know they are given it via divine inspiration. What they have to do every day is they have to pick which spells they are going to be able to use for the next 24 hours.
Yeah, which is cool, an interesting way to go about it. So far, that's the only way that I've played Magic casters. They've all been in that category.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes it's tricky to know what to pick for the next day because you're only limited to a certain number of prepared spells.
Yeah, you are limited to spell slots.
Yeah, but it's an interesting way to sort of interpret where you get your source of magic from. And obviously that being the deity. Knowing a little something about your deity you chose, I would imagine helps too when you're adding some flavor to your character.
Well, this leads into the spell slot discussion, right? Because a lot of people get confused by spell slots.
Yeah.
Because you can be a 4th level wizard, but you still only have 2nd level spell slots. And people get confused because, well, I'm a 4th level wizard. Shouldn't I have 4th level spell slots? And what people often get confused by is the fact that spell levels are not the same as character levels. They are very different things, and I really think they should be called something other than spell levels.
Yes.
I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's just taxonomy that is causing the confusion.
Yeah, and it's a little tricky to try to explain it, and I think the more you use it, the more it makes sense. Perhaps starting with a character who's not a full-on caster class might be a good way to introduce yourself to it if you're a new player.
Mm-hmm, yeah, such as a support caster, such as a bard or a ranger.
Right, instead of going whole hog and going straight for a warlock or something, maybe.
Right.
So that's what I did, that's how I introduced myself. There's still a lot to learn about magic and spells.
Although, funnily, warlocks are the only spellcasting class who do not have the spellcasting ability.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Warlocks get their magic through an ability called Pact Magic.
Ah, okay.
Which grants them more or less the same kind of ability to cast spells, but in a much different way and in a much different fashion than other arcane casters.
Okay. So I imagine that their spell list would probably differ quite a lot from some of the other caster classes.
The base Warlock spell list is much more truncated. It's very small. And it doesn't need to be very big because Warlocks can't cast a lot of spells. They only have 2 spell slots for a good 4 or 5 levels.
Interesting.
Their spell slots do recharge on a short rest instead of a long rest.
Okay.
Their main ability comes in the form of Eldritch Invocations. These are choices that they make as they level up that allows them to imbue magic within themselves. For example, some of those invocations include being able to cast invisibility at will.
Oh, that's cool.
Instead of using a spell slot. Or having permanent dark vision up to 120 feet and being able to see through magical darkness.
That's really awesome, actually.
And various other kind of cool things like that. And of course, the ultimate cantrip that every Warlock should take, because it's only available to Warlocks, is Eldritch Blast.
Yeah.
Which shoots multiple bolts of energy out as a spell attack, increases as you level, and you can take Eldritch Invocations to make that ability more powerful as you level up.
This does sound like a pretty intriguing class, and it's quite a bit different than the other spellcasting classes, but it is also newer, is that right?
It is. The Warlock first appeared in 3.5.
Ah, okay. So it's been a while. Maybe not in this current version. Well, I don't know how much they've changed per edition, but for some reason, I've always thought the 5e Warlock was pretty different.
It is very different from every other spellcaster.
Yeah.
But it's cool nonetheless, and I do like it.
It is. Yeah. That'd be something I'd like to try one day, of course, because I want to dabble in it all, but I have to admit, as someone new to playing spellcasting characters, it sounds like something I might put off for a bit till I get a really good handle on spells, even though it may not make a difference. As we just discussed, they're so different. It's just a different approach to spellcasting in general, so I don't think it's necessarily something a young player should shy away from.
I would agree with that.
So, we've talked about sources of magic. We've talked about magic casting classes. There is another layer to magic, though, that I think is worth mentioning, and that there are different schools of magic.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I think ultimately it just sort of adds another layer of flavor to the magic world.
Yeah.
I know I've been in situations in a campaign where we are maybe trying to discern if an object we've come across has magic properties, and you might start with, oh, it's from this school of magic. We've got abjuration, conjuration,
yes,
divination,
yes,
enchantment, evocation, illusion, necromancy, and transmutation.
Yep.
So everything falls in one of those categories. And I don't know about every one of them. I know about certain schools that I've played with, and there are some unique things about each one. For instance, necromancy sounds bad, but it is a school that is available to classes such as clerics to use because it can either be damage causing or it can have to do with sort of affecting the life force of a creature or person.
Yeah, there are healing spells that fall into the Necromancy school of magic,
Which I thought was pretty interesting.
such as Raise Dead.
Yes. I don't know if it's worth explaining what each one of these do.
We can just do a brief, quick rundown.
Yeah. Take it away. You'll be much more succinct than I will.
So, Abjuration is a spell dealing with protective or enhancing magics. So if you cast Shield, Abjuration spell. Conjuration is to create something where nothing once was. So create food and water, Conjuration.
Could be a creature or a weapon or anything, right?
Yep. Divination is the ability to discover new information based on the spells you cast, such as Scrying, which is a very popular divination spell. The enchantment school, they're augmenting spells, but they don't make things stronger. They just add additional properties on top of it.
Okay.
For example, Charm would be an enchantment spell.
Yeah, makes sense.
Evocation are big blasty destroyo spells. Fireball, the classic evocation spell.
Yeah.
Illusion spells make things appear as what they are not, such as Minor Image. Necromancy, we've already talked about. It affects tissues and creatures' life forces, such as Raise Dead or Finger of Death.
Yeah. Some cool spells.
And transmutation changes one thing into another thing.
Right. Almost like alchemy.
Kind of. But those are very quick, dirty rundowns on the schools of magic.
Yeah, it's nice to know that they've got several. Breaks it up nicely, I think. Everything that I've encountered, it makes sense as to what school it belongs to, and that kind of helps you describe the properties of that spell. So, Necromancy was the one that threw me for a loop the first time I kept seeing it come up. I was like, what? So, yeah, it makes sense when you start to see what the spells do, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute, won't we?
Well, let's talk about how characters use magic, right?
Yeah, okay. Let's go right in it.
The most common way is to obviously cast a spell. But how do you cast a spell? Every spell has at least one of three components. You've got your verbal, your somatic, and your material.
Okay.
Verbal are the spoken words of the spell. They're your abracadabra.
Sure.
Somatic components are specific physical hand motions you might need to cast the spell, such as waving a wand or a Naruto jutsu hand signal.
Sure. Drawing in the sand, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Material components are what they sound like. Eye of Newt, Tongue of Frog, a la the Weird Sisters in Macbeth, right? The three sisters. However, not all spells require all three of those. Some are only verbal or some are only somatic. It all kind of depends on the spell, and those are listed in the description of the spell.
A pretty big distinction is not all spells need material components. For instance, cantrips or level 0 spells, I guess, as they're otherwise known.
Correct.
Don't take any materials at all.
That's true. And also, material components can also be taken care of by using a spell casting focus. Or at least a lot of them can. Not all of them can. Spellcasting focus is like a glass orb for a wizard or a holy symbol for a cleric. You can have one of those, or you can have what is called a component pouch, which is where you keep all your little bits and bobs. And it's more of a flavor thing than anything else.
Right.
The only time you actually need specific components is when they have a gold cost in the spell description, such as Identify. The Identify spell specifies a pearl worth 100 gold pieces, which means if you don't have that specific pearl in your inventory, you cannot cast the spell. And some of those spells consume the item, and some of them don't. For example, Identify does not destroy the pearl, it doesn't consume it. However, the Revivify spell, which needs diamonds worth 50 gold pieces, those are consumed by the spell, and it says it in the description.
Right.
So watch out. Some of the spells eat your stuff, and you'll need more stuff if you want to cast those spells again.
Yes, that would be important for stocking up. You're in certain cities and towns, just planning ahead.
It is always good to, once you reach a certain level, make sure that your cleric always has a couple 500 GP diamonds, because those are your Raise Dead diamonds right there.
That would make me so nervous to think, I've heard of stories, campaign stories, where, people have lost their bags of items and other things, due to various pitfalls in their adventure, and, losing your satchel that had your 500 GP diamonds would be Yep. Of course, by that level, you're probably making a fair deal amount of gold from your adventures.
It all depends on the world and the game.
So what are other ways characters can use magic?
Well, I have seen players use spells in fascinating kind of ways. I've had one use Thaumaturgy while underwater to make giant crabs skitter out of the way. I had others use Create and Destroy Water to remove some nutrient liquid from a illithid tadpole pool. And in order to try to get the tadpoles out.
Yep.
However, there are also magical potions. There are
Yep.
magical items, magical weapons, spell scrolls that all require you to activate, use, or cast them in some fashion.
Right.
For example, a lot of magical rings require you to expend a charge that is inside of the ring to activate its ability.
And they're usually limited charge, right? Once it's used up, that's it. It's gone.
Yeah, it might have 1 or 2 charges per long rest or per dawn.
Sure. Okay.
There are some items that have a certain number of charges, and after they're gone, that's it, they're gone. For example, a wand of magic missile has up to, I think, 9 charges on it, and if you expend all 9, you roll a d20, and if you roll a 1, the wand is destroyed.
I see.
If you don't, then the wand regains X number of charges the next morning. One fun little segment we like to do here on Mid-Level Adventurers is our Tavern Corner, where we talk about what we are imbibing this evening. So, Matt, I will ask you, what are you imbibing tonight?
This is a repeat for me, what I'm imbibing tonight, but I like it, and I'm back to the 6 Point Brewing Bengali IPA.
Uh-huh.
Truth be told, I looked for one of their other IPAs that I wanted to bring on for the show. I couldn't find this time around. There may be a tiny bit of a beer shortage in certain parts of the city now due to COVID. That's okay. I do like the Bengali, so I'm back to drinking that. It's just a really solid IPA, kind of hits all the right notes, and yeah, and it's one of my favorite breweries in the city.
Well, fair enough.
What you imbibing tonight? Hopefully something new.
I am drinking from Braven Brewing Company. I am drinking their Pilsner.
Oh, that's the crow with the antlers?
Yeah, it is the Bold and Crafty. I think that is just the slogan of their company, because this is just a Bushwick Pilsner, I believe.
Okay.
Because it is brewed in Brooklyn and Bushwick.
So many are.
But it's very good. It's almost got a bit of a honey taste to it.
Okay. I admittedly have seen the can around a lot and stayed away from it because it's a Pilsner and it's not usually my favorite, but...
Yeah, it is light and crisp. It is not very heavy. It doesn't sit on your tongue very well. There's no lingering aftertaste. There's a slight mouth pull when you drink it, but it's nothing offensive or strong. Honestly, I could drink it all day. It is smooth and refreshing. I have been going back and forth between, should I try it because it comes in a 4-pack?
Sure.
But they are 16-ounce cans instead of 12-ounce cans.
Okay, yeah, big boys.
I wasn't expecting too much from it, to be honest, but it comes out pretty well.
There's something to be said, certainly, about the light, crisp beer that doesn't leave too much of an aftertaste in particular. I do find, as much as I love IPAs, sometimes that is kind of a side effect of them that may be wanted or unwanted, depending on how you feel about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes after drinking one, I have to completely rinse out my mouth before I move on to either a different beer or food or anything else,
Yeah, they can linger, whereas the Pilsner, not so much.
I would say this one, the Bengali, is a bit of a lingerer.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I like its aftertaste.
Nice. Yeah, I think that is what we're drinking tonight in the tavern.
I think an important thing, though, you brought this up already, just in some of the descriptions of how you've had seen characters use spells. I mean, there's more than just I cast Firebolt, right? There's more than I want to cast a spell to damage my opponent. There are so many more spells that are worth knowing about that don't strictly manipulate the health of your party members or an enemy, right? You've got Purify Food and Water. There's so many that are survival-based, right? Create or Destroy Water. Manipulate Flame. There's the well-known and much loved Detect Magic. So there's so many just spells that are, I think we've mentioned this before, that are like utility spells, right? They're just there to help you navigate in your adventures in the world. And using them creatively can actually help you solve the problem of certain encounters. Yeah. You may not, the answer may not always be a damage spell, or may not always be hit them with Eldritch Blast. It may be, like you said, do a transmutation spell that causes a distraction. I just said the wrong school. That's not what I meant, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Being creative, I think, is kind of key when you want to utilize a sort of a wide range of spells that will make the playthroughs very interesting, that aren't always casting the same firebolt,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to go through that whole list. There's so many of
There are hundreds of spells, and every time a source book comes out, they add more.
And one spell can be used any number of ways a lot of times, so...
Right. What's fun is when people try to be like, I'm going to cast Acid Splash on the door. Aha, you cannot target an iron door with Acid Splash, because it specifically says choose 1 or 2 target creatures you can see within range.
Oh, that's good, yeah. It is important to know those stipulations. There are certain fire-based spells, like I think it's Create Bonfire, that if you're not careful where you place Create Bonfire, if there are flammable components nearby that might touch the bonfire, well, you might have just burned down the shack that you were trying to camp in for the night.
It's true.
It's a good point to know what all the little stipulations are, because there are some little fine print details in some of the spells. And it's a good idea to have an understanding of that going in, but for most questions in game, the DM is going to hopefully be able to help clarify and rule on that.
Read your spells. That's what that comes down to.
Yes, read your spells. I got hit with that very recently with the cleric I'm playing, Newly Forged. I wanted to cast Command or Suggestion, I can't remember which. Mm-hmm. And the first time around, I just was like, I'm going to cast this spell. And Jarrod was like, great, what languages do you speak? And I told him, he was like, they don't understand you. There's a little bit of fine print in that spell that says it has to be in a language that the creature targeted understands.
Yes.
So the next time that came up, I made a point as a character to say, hey, do you understand Common? They answered in Common. I said, great. Now I'm going to cast this spell on you.
Sometimes it matters, it just depends on the spell. Always read your spells. And that doesn't mean you can't cast the spell in another language. You totally can, if you know the language that creature speaks or that can understand or whatever.
Sure. Sometimes it doesn't matter, right? One of my favorite spells is Healing Word. And Healing Word is specific in the text as you're speaking to your willing target to offer them some healing. And it doesn't matter if they understand it or not. So for flavor, I always do it in whatever my species' home language is.
Yeah.
It's just something I like to do.
Yeah, totally. Well, speaking of Healing Word, we're going to talk about some favorite spells here. So, go ahead. You've already mentioned Healing Word.
Yeah, that would be top of my list, I think. It is one of my favorites because it can be cast as a bonus action instead of taking a full action, especially at an early level. For instance, as the cleric, I am constantly balancing the number of spell slots I have with what I can do as full actions in combat, which may be melee or something else. So it's nice to be able to hit the person in front of me and then turn my head over my shoulder and offer some healing to my downed opponent who may be too far away for me to get to. And that's what's important, because you don't have to be physically touching them. So that one's a good one. Obviously doesn't do as much healing as Cure Wounds, but it's gotten me out of a lot of tough situations. Should we just go trade back and forth one for one?
Sure. We have to get the elephant out of the room, right? There's Fireball, which is like the most popular spell ever.
Yeah.
Everybody loves it. Everybody takes it. Yep. Nobody asked how big the room was. They just cast Fireball.
Every time. And Fireball is one of those you should read the text.
Yes. It will affect every creature in a 20-foot radius, not diameter. 20-foot radius.
Yes.
So beware of fire explosions.
Yep.
However, as much as I do like Fireball because it's a classic, I think my favorite spell is an 8th level spell called Illusory Dragon.
Oh.
This spell came out in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. It lets you create a huge dragon made up of shadows that enemies need to save against or be frightened by, much like an actual dragon. You can have it move and breathe a shadowy breath weapon on each turn as a bonus action. So you use your bonus action to move it, and during that movement, it can breathe its breath weapon.
Whoa, okay.
It is immune to all damage. If anyone tries to attack it, they automatically miss it, and it automatically succeeds on any and all saving throws it has to make.
That's pretty incredible.
So the only way to take it out is to take out the person concentrating on it.
Ah, I see.
However, if a creature figures out that it is an illusion with an investigation check, they can then see through the illusion, and they get advantage on all saving throws from the breath weapon. It's so amazing to be able to just summon that up on the battlefield, because you can also cast other spells while it's up, as long as they're not a concentration spell.
Oh, very cool.
Which I guess is something that we should mention. Some spells do require you to maintain concentration, which is just you have to focus on that spell. It means you can't cast any other spells that have the concentration tagline in it.
Correct.
While you're concentrating on one spell that has a concentration effect, you can use your action to cast another spell that doesn't have one, such as Fireball.
Right.
So you could cast Illusory Dragon, and then on your next turn have it move and use its breath weapon, and then also cast Fireball.
Yes, that's an important thing to point out, and a great example of that I can think of recently in our Newly Forged campaign is my cleric character cast Suggestion on a hobgoblin to get him to pack up and leave. He was camped out with his brethren along the road asking people for tolls. I can only cast it on one, and I was hoping that he might, inspire the others to follow him. But it didn't work that way, but it did work on him.
Yeah.
But as the battle ensued later, spoiler alert, I quickly realized that was it. If I wanted him to keep packing his stuff and leave, I had to keep that concentration, and I could not cast another concentration spell.
Yeah.
And every time I got hit, I got so nervous that it was going to break my concentration.
Yeah. That's the other thing about concentration. If you are concentrating on a spell and you take damage, you have to roll what is called a concentration check, which is really just a constitution saving throw. And the DC is either 10 or half of the total damage you took, whichever one is higher. So if you take 18 damage, it's a DC 10. If you take 4 damage, it's a DC 10. If you take 22 damage, it's a DC 11.
Right. Thankfully, I passed, but every time I was like, ah!
Yeah.
We're going to have another enemy in the fight as soon as I lose the spell.
Yep. Something else we should mention real quick. When you cast a leveled spell, let's say you cast Fireball, you cannot cast another spell on your turn, even if it says it is able to be cast as a bonus action, unless it is a cantrip. So you can only cast a cantrip and a leveled spell on your turn. You cannot cast 2 leveled spells or 2 cantrips. So, for example, you can use your bonus action to cast Healing Word.
Yep.
That is a leveled spell, but you could then use your action to cast Firebolt.
Correct.
That tricks up a lot of people, so we just want to throw it out there to add one more crazy thing into the spellcasting episode.
You're right. I know. It's starting to get more and more complicated, isn't it?
But back to some cool spells.
Yeah.
A spell that I do not like, only because I'm a dungeon master, is Heat Metal.
Yeah, that was going to be on my list.
Oh, I hate it so much. It's just constant damage to any creature who is wearing plate mail or chain mail or a belt buckle.
Yep.
I mean, it's a great low-level spell, but they can't save from it unless they get out of the armor or drop their sword, and it's like, oh, come on.
Yep.
It is so wrong, and it's a concentration check, so the druid who cast it can be 100 feet away or 60 feet away, and because the paladin and the fighter are beating up on this guy, he's taking this heating damage. I mean, it is a great tactically sound spell, and it doesn't do like tons of damage, but it does enough to be annoying every turn.
Right.
Which is kind of the point of it, and that's what
Yes.
makes it such a good spell. But as a dungeon master, I just hate it so much.
I can understand, yeah. I would too as a dungeon master, but obviously as a druid, I'm going to pick Heat Metal every time.
And I would too.
I mean, that being said, I have been currently playing sort of melee casters, so I'm always putting myself in that position of getting the concentration knocked off me, but
Yeah.
let's see. I'll try to throw out one that I've used myself that I think is possibly underrated. Here we go, Shillelagh.
Shillelagh's a good one.
In short, you imbue a quarterstaff. And I don't know if it can only be a quarterstaff, but that's where I've seen it used.
Yeah, it's a quarterstaff is the most common. You can also use it on a club.
Right. It needs to be a wooden weapon.
Yeah.
You imbue it with some magic. And here's the really cool part. It can count as a magical weapon for the purposes of, if you're fighting something that is resistant to non-magical weapons.
Correct.
And you're level 2 and you don't have any magical weapons. Now you have one. It's your magical Shillelagh quarterstaff.
Yep.
And it boosts the damage of your normal melee attack. So it's just a fun little, it's not a crazy high damage spell necessarily, but it is a nice little bonus.
Yeah, it's a nice little thing that just you cast it and it works and you're good.
Yeah, every time. Your turn.
I think there are a lot of great low-level spells. I think Identify, Conjure Animals, Chaos Bolt, Chromatic Orb, and Cure Wounds are really great low-level spells.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's also some really amazing high-level spells. I would say
Absolutely.
that beyond Illusory Dragon, I would say Power Word Kill.
Mm-hmm.
If the creature you choose has 100 hit points or fewer, it dies.
That's pretty aggressive.
Yeah, so it's a gamble. If you use it and your target has over 100 hit points, nothing happens. But if you're wearing down on the BEEG and you get him down and he's bleeding and you're like, I'm going to use my 9th level spell because you only get one if you're high enough of a level to have it. You only get one a day. You can cast it and hope it happens.
Yep.
Because there's no save, there's no attack roll, it just is. And it's an enchantment spell.
Pretty interesting. I've heard someone else refer to those spells as maybe like save or suck. Maybe I've got it wrong, but basically you can either turn the tide of the battle or you just wasted a spell slot.
Yeah, it's like spray and pray is essentially what it is.
Yeah.
Put all your eggs in a basket and go for it.
And hope for the best.
Yeah. Meteor Swarm is another really great one, which essentially summons all these meteors from the cosmos and just peppers the battlefield with them.
It's pretty cool.
And the ultimate spell in my mind is Wish.
Oh, tell me.
Wish is not a blanket, you get what you want. There are a lot of nuances to the Wish spell, which I'm not going to go into right now. But the Wish spell is a 9th level spell. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't give you exactly what you wanted. But if you use it right, you can affect major change in the multiverse.
Oh, That's cool.
There are limits to it.
Right, but that is really awesome. I honestly don't know that many high-level spells, so I'll focus on some of the lower ones that I think are worth picking up. I think there are a couple that a lot of classes can pick them up, and I tend to find they're very useful just for someone to have. Things like Detect Magic, Light.
Yep.
You can make an object light up. You now have a source of light, and that can be really useful. You don't always have an entire party full of people that have dark vision. And for that matter, dark vision is a spell that you can cast that, it grants you for a number of hours dark vision, which is really fantastic, because obviously casting light on something, there's no sneaking involved in that. If you want to be able to see in the dark and perhaps go undetected, dark vision's where it's at. And another favorite of mine that I use a lot and I see used a lot is Fairy Fire.
Yeah, Fairy Fire is a good one.
It's a great first level spell. Each object in a 20-foot cube within range is outlined in blue, green, or violet light, your choice. Any creature in the area when the spell is cast is also outlined in light if it fails a Dex saving throw.
Yep.
For the duration, objects and affected creatures shed dim light in a 10-foot radius. What this means, mechanically, is any attack roll against the affected creature or object has advantage if the attacker can see it, and the affected creature or object can't benefit from being invisible, which as a low-level character can be huge if your DM suddenly throws out invisible creatures, monsters, whatever.
Yep.
It is a concentration spell, though, just worth noting.
Right. But spells can be quite versatile overall. They don't have to just do damage. In fact, some of the ones that don't do damage are the most versatile, and it's all in how you use them. For example, you can use the spell Floating Disc or Tensor's Floating Disc.
Yeah.
If you have a dead or injured comrade, you can put them on the disc. Instead of having to haul them out, you can put them on it and have it follow you all the way back to town.
I've heard of people using that to get loot out of a dungeon that may have been too heavy for them to carry. They were on the verge of being, over encumbered, and there you go. Now we can get this, treasure chest back.
Yeah, you might kill the big mean dragon, but how are you going to get all its stuff out?
All that gold, exactly. Also worth noting, though, friendly fire is a thing. They will still affect party members within the affected area.
Most of them will, yeah.
Most of them. Yeah, there might be a few exceptions, but that's just worth knowing. I've made that mistake before. Read your spell, know what the possible outcomes are, but you do have to take some risks sometimes, so...
Well, to wrap up this episode, I think that one thing players and DMs find frustrating is the crafting of magical items.
Yeah, something I have not done yet.
It can take weeks, months, or even years to enchant a single magic item, according to the Dungeon Master's Guide. But if you really think about it, it's probably for the best, because if it didn't, the market would be flush with magical items, and they wouldn't be very special, and everybody would have a flaming sword walking around. But that's the only, negative magic thing I can think about. Regardless of that, magic and spells are a great intrinsic feature of D&D. And honestly, if you're running a game, if you want to create a cool creature or an environment, if you want to have a floating tavern over a lava flow, then just say, yeah, there's a floating tavern over the lava flow. It's had magic cast on it, and it's old and it's arcane, and nobody really knows why it does it. It just does it.
Yeah.
With enough time, anything is possible.
Or you can offer your own sort of explanation of how magic might exist in the world, which is, I think, something you've done with Newly Forged. The world has a backstory that you've crafted that kind of gives an explanation. Well, suggestion, I would say. We haven't learned all there is to know about the forming of the world, but it is a unique spin on it. Yeah, the creativity is not limited here. It can be whatever you want. Well, on that note, I would say it can maybe seem a little daunting to go through a spell list for the first time and pick out spells. There are obviously some really awesome ones that are great at dealing damage, and those are important because a lot of what you're going to be doing in a campaign is fighting.
Yep.
But there are so many out there that do other things that it may not be so apparent how useful they are, but with a little creativity, you can find some really cool and amazing uses for them.
There are certainly some that don't explain well enough in their descriptions what they actually do.
Yeah.
Often these come up in-game when you try to cast them to your benefit, and there's enough wiggle room and gray area where it's just oh, I'm not sure about that.
And it may not be such a big deal for most classes that your choices day-to-day on spells is just, I'm going to prepare a different spell. So if you prepare a spell for a day, you use it, it didn't go so well, or it didn't have the effect I wanted. Okay, just don't prepare it for the next day. So I think for most classes, it's not a big issue. And to that end, I would say even maybe experiment with some spells, maybe try some things that you haven't used, or maybe have a very creative way of using it or something.
There are some classes that do allow you to swap out prepared spells.
That might be a little bit of a problem, I guess, for the wizard if you've spent some time and some gold learning a spell, and then you use it and you're like, well, that wasn't what I thought it was.
But you always have it as the wizard, and you can just keep it in your book, and if you ever need it again, you can pull it out.
Yep, turn to that page number, and there it is.
Yep. Well, we would like to thank you all for joining us on this adventure. Join us next week as we continue this theme and talk about the glorious world of loot, where we will be discussing magic items.
Ooh.
Yeah, remember to check out our friend and the composer of all the music used on Mid-Level Adventurers, John D. Ivy, on SoundCloud.com. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MidLVLAdventure.
And please check out our website on Wix at midleveladventurer.wixsite.com. And feel free to email us at midleveladventurers@gmail.com.
And by all means, feel free to check out Matt and myself on Newly Forged on twitch.tv/newlyforged. That's NUULIFORGED. Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And until then, I'm Jarrod Jehoda.
And I'm Matt Morris.
Mind the traps and keep adventuring.